Well, guys, we're finally here, the end of 2025, and I think we should end this year very strong. So this is a very interesting final video to wrap up the year. Um, but yeah, I decided to watch an overly sarcastic production video, and this one is about the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which, well, it's just history summarized the Ottoman Empire, but I have to say the rise of the Ottoman Empire is probably one of my most successful and viewed series this year, so definitely the Ottomans are something gotta visit more in the future for sure. And overall, its history was very interesting to learn for me, so I don't mind this being the video to cap it all off before we begin something new in 2026 tomorrow. And, yeah, we have covered a lot about the Ottomans, mainly their rise, their fall, and a lot, well, not so much in between, but mainly those two, components. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more, because I really do love overly sarcastic productions. When I remember watching these guys when I was in middle school, like, I watched their Iliad video and their Odyssey video, um, so it definitely this is a channel that I've been watching since I was a kid, so it's now kind of cool that I'm watching them, as an adult. And we did cover their Byzantine series, their Rome series, which is actually one of my favorites. The way, they break it down and explain stuff in history is just one of my favorites, and I don't know, it's like really easy to listen to and just kind of grasp. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them break down the Ottoman Empire. And, yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than we should get to it. But first, I want to say, if you want to watch the original video without me being here and yapping, the link to this video is down in the description down below. And if you like my content and my channel and you want to help support me, feel free to subscribe, like, and comment. It would help me out a lot. It would really help out my small but humble channel, and I would appreciate it. With that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch History Summarized: The Ottoman Empire by Overly Sarcastic Productions.
Ah, yes, the Ottoman Empire, a land of proud history, unique furniture, and criminally underappreciated Assassin's Creed sequels. Between its rise in the 1300s and its dissolution after the First World War, the Ottomans have been around for a good long while, and they spanned a lot of the Mediterranean in the interim. Early modern Europeans refer to them as the sick man of Europe as a polite way of saying just die already, but as we'll see, that lasting portrayal of weakness and seemingly perpetual decline really misses the point. So, to find out what makes the Ottomans more than just a sick man, let's do some history. Early Ottoman history is notoriously murky because they didn't do a lot of writing until they stopped moving their capital every 30 years and properly settled down. But it all started with this one guy named Osman, who had a very apocryphal but nonetheless interesting dream of a tree growing up.
Yes, so I said we covered this in the Rise of the Ottoman Empire series and Osman's dream of a tree, branching out, right? I have to say, it's hilarious that Europe was calling them, like, the sick man, especially when you think of, like, the Ottoman at, like, its rise and infancy was kind of soloing the Crusades of Europe. I mean, obviously, talking about later Ottomans, right? And how weak they were near the end, but still, from where they came from, it really was impressive.
Out of him and covering the entire world in its shade, which is some pretty hardcore foreshadowing. See, Osman was the leader of a small Anatolian tribe left in the messy post-Mongol power vacuum, and as far as his descendants are concerned, their empire started with him, which is why we call it Osmanlı, or Ottoman. He and his son Orhan got to conquering and pushed northwest to Bursa and then across the Hellespont to Edirne, the latter of which remained the Ottoman capital for nearly a century. Now, when it came to holding on to their land, the aging Byzantine Empire had the grip strength of an arcade claw machine, and no one demonstrated that better than the fourth Ottoman Sultan. Yildirim the Thunderbolt Bayezid earned his awesome nickname by doubling the empire in a decade.
Yeah, Bayezid moved quick. Also, like, him and his campaigns. Like, Bayezid was known for his forced marches, and basically catching his enemies unawares by how quickly they marched, and, Yeah, that's why he was called a Thunderbolt. Also, obviously, his great expansion of the Empire. Like, the dude moved really quick. Um, so, that was a big part. Though, knowing what happens with him in the Battle of Ankara, and how he gets humbled by Timur is another thing.
This is your empire, and this is your empire on Yildirim Beyazıt. Yeah. And speaking of Sultan Yildirim Beyazıt, I should say that my pronunciations have been cleared by my very Turkish college roommate Emre, so I'm doing my best here. But anyway, as you can see, the early Ottoman Empire was perfectly bisected between Anatolia and Rumelia by a once mighty but now tiny and insignificant town called, Constantinople. Yeah, so after the combined forces of Europe sacked the city 200 years earlier while on their way to a crusade that they never even started, Constantinople was a shell of its former self. They tried to recruit allies to bail them out, but it didn't really work.
Yeah, there's a lot with the Romans. The Romans were on a decline. The Byzantine Empire has been called the decline that lasted 1,000 years, because despite it really was like losing Anatolia, I think was kind of the main point where like the point of no return, because that's what allowed the Turks. But there's also the constant civil wars and coups and like incompetent emperors that all really played a part. And also the Fourth Crusade, often said that, there's been a lot of speculation that if the Fourth Crusade and the sacking Constantinople never happened, the Romans could have maybe survived, or at least continued it for a bit longer. I'm not sure, obviously, it's a bit dicey with alternate history, just how much, but yeah, that was one of the worst moments to happen in, like, for the Byzantine era for the Romans.
Even an Ottoman force at the gates of Constantinople couldn't compel the Europeans to break their reputation for legendarily poor teamwork. Luckily for the Byzantines, this quasi-Mongol guy Tamerlane yoinked Anatolia and threw the Ottomans into a brief kerfuffle of sultanless civil warring. Notably, the only big civil war in their whole 600-year-long history, which shocks me.
Wow.
And if you think that's absurd, get a load of why it's the only one. So you see, the official practice for avoiding succession crises like this in the future.
Oh, yeah, okay, I remember. I was a bit shocked there, like, really? The only civil war? But then I remember, yeah, they kind of legalized murdering your family once you, I think it was Mehmed II who legalized, once you take power, you need to murder all your brothers. And again, it's a very brutal system. One that I think with our modern sensibilities would be like, that's incredibly messed up. But, you can't lie that it kind of got the job done in terms of making sure you won't have rebellions. Because again, when it comes to power dynamics, we've seen a lot. Family doesn't mean crap when it comes to political intrigue or civil coups. Cousins will turn on cousins, brothers against brothers, sons against fathers. It's just like, there ain't no loyalty at the top, as we've seen it a lot in history. So, again, I can't condone it with my modern sensibility, but I can't say that it didn't help in the sense of with civil strife and wars and stuff. So, again, it ain't right, but it was effective nonetheless, right? So yeah, obviously I'm just speaking through my modern sensibility, but still, brutal times, brutal world.
Was, state-sanctioned fratricide? Which sounds really stupid, because it is, but it worked, though. So I have no choice but to file this under history's greatest ideas that were just dumb enough to work.
Yeah.
So with that sorted out and the empire reconstituted, the Ottomans directed their attention back to Constantinople, the so-called Red Apple of Christendom. Besides being the one strategically non-Ottoman speck on the map, the conquest of the city carried huge secular and religious prestige. It also provided a strategic center between their split holdings in Anatolia and Rumelia, and it had a built-in source of income from Black Sea trade. Sultan Mehmed II really wanted Constantinople Constantinople to surrender, but they didn't, so he sacked it with insane siege weaponry and a 10-to-1 army size advantage. Mehmet made conquering the most historically impregnable city in Europe look easy. As congratulations, Venice added the Ottomans to the official Constantinople Conquerors Club, where they mostly just shared history memes back and forth. Thankfully, although lots of the city was destroyed, the famous Byzantine church of Hagia Sophia survived, and the Sultan was so awestruck by it that he ordered its conversion to a mosque to preserve it. As a result, Hagia Sophia, as it's known in Turkish, is still standing today. The Ottomans may have been conquerors, but they were keenly aware of the historical legacies they were inheriting along with the city of Constantinople.
Yeah, much more polite compared to the Crusaders, eh? In some respect. Who just, again, it was appalling what the Crusaders did in the Fourth Crusade. I remember reacting to that from kings and generals and just being, like, appalled. And again, the Ottomans, like many other places, basically the rest of the world, claim to be the new Rome, right? They claim to be the successor of Rome. I think I heard it said that after Mehmet conquered it, yeah, they claimed the title Rome, or something like that. So it would kind of make sense to have some, like, oh, we're carrying it over to us, you know? But still, it's nice that structures like this still exist, for sure.
And speaking of Istanbul, let's clear up those names. Constantinople before and after the conquest was known to the Ottomans as Constantiniye, which likewise means City of Constantine in Arabic, and it stayed as that for most of the empire. Unofficially, people called it the city, and Greek phrases about being in or going to the city, translated as Stinpoli, turned into what we now know as Istanbul. For convenience, I'll be referring to it as Istanbul from here on out, even though that wasn't really its official name until the 1920s. With Istanbul incorporated, Mehmet the Conqueror lived up to his name by pushing out in all directions, even getting the Ottomans a foothold on Crimea in addition to their Aegean and Anatolian holdings. They quickly figured out that the Europeans weren't really as tied to their religious fervor as they claimed and were much more interested in fighting each other. So the Ottomans played enemies against each other and conquered peacewise, unmet by any wall of pan-European defense. And they got themselves a really nice domain out of it. Between their natural resources and control over key trading routes, they had a doubly advantageous position for most of their history. At this point, their biggest rival was the Republic of Venice, who held strategic trading posts across the Mediterranean, like Cyprus and Crete, in part thanks to their massive navy. But at the same time, Venice was also the Ottomans' closest trading partners, so when they weren't squabbling over islands, they were making each other fabulously rich. It was a fruitful, if tense, relationship, and
yeah, kind of like frenemies, eh? I guess. Though I'm not sure if friend is a good word to use, but I'll just use it, frenemies. Yeah, that's the thing, though. Like I said, the geography of the empire, mainly being split between Anatolia and the Balkans, you know, a foot in Europe and more eastward, it's just a unique position to hold. And yeah, Venice. We have covered that. I believe in Epic History's Rise of Venice series we covered that there were eventually naval conflicts, and I think the Ottoman Navy eventually became so powerful it could, like, it defeated, like, the Navy sent from Europe and established itself both land and sea as a very formidable force. So yeah.
happened in large part because of the Ottoman geography and both parties' willingness to cooperate across religious lines. It's largely due to this partnership that we ever got the Renaissance, as trade brought back classical Greek and Roman works preserved by Muslim scholars, in addition to the piles of cash that funded new artworks in Italy. Mehmet II loved his classics and thought of himself as a New Age Alexander, but truth be told, he wasn't all that far off in terms of lasting historical significance. And I'm talking a lot about the sultans here because the Ottoman government was pretty dependent on their head honcho being, you know, an empire. Aside from local governments, most administration relied solidly on the Sultan and his small army of viziers and bureaucrats. Speaking of armies, he also had a notoriously badass personal guard called the Janissaries, who were supposed to serve.
Yeah, the Janissaries, at least in their earlier conception, they were basically slave soldiers, as they've also been called, taken from different areas and basically, like, you know, trained from like a really young age, childhood, to to serve and protect the Sultan. At least that was them in their earlier conceptions. Later on, it evolved and changed into more, like, higher ups just kind of more interested in themselves than it is a really interesting evolution, you know.
Of the Sultan at all times, but in the long run they had a suspicious amount of input into who did and did not become the next Sultan. That was a problem the Ottomans—
Yeah, kind of like becoming the Praetorian Guard later on in a sense, right? Though they were cool in the beginning, the Praetorian Guard, I don't think they were ever fully cool. They went emperor killing pretty early on with Caligula. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah.
never quite solved. Sultan Bayezid II didn't do much in comparison to his old man Mehmet, but then Selim I shows up and boom, he conquers Egypt and Syria in no time flat. You can imagine the collective ooh that the Europeans were making in the news of that one. And this was a big deal because with the Egyptian Mamluk Sultanate defeated and the entire Eastern Mediterranean under their belt, no one could go east or west without crossing the Ottomans. But there was another option, south, and this is where their actual biggest trading rival shows up. Portugal.
Yes.
Situated on the opposite end of the Mediterranean, the Portuguese—
Yeah, so we covered the Ottoman-Portuguese War by Kings and Generals, which was unique in that it implemented kind of proxy wars in Africa, you know, Cold War, pre-Cold War in a sense. It eventually ended with, you know, the King of Portugal getting himself killed in the Battle of the Three Kings, and Portugal being absorbed into Habsburg Spain, as the Habsburgs were on the rise, having holdings in Italy, obviously the Holy Roman Empire, Austria-Habsburg, and Austria-Hungary, and, you know, the peninsula of Spain and Portugal, so eventually kind of being integrated. So the Ottomans kind of won, though not through any major decisive victories, or at least getting their hands dirty too much themselves. So it's a really unique war. I definitely recommend checking it out, or maybe even my reactions to it if you want. From Kings and Generals.
figured out how to get access to the Indian Ocean by sailing around Africa. Since the Ottomans had control of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, they had a similarly advantageous route to key markets. They tried digging a Suez Canal in the later 1500s, but they didn't have the right technology for it, so oh well. Also, the back and forth between the Ottomans and Venice was still going on, but it had settled down when the sultans found much bigger fish to fry. The Ottomans also had beef with the Safavid Persians to the east, but that's not the biggest deal in the long run. And speaking of enemies who didn't put up much of a fight, the Pope called for a crusade when the Ottomans took the Holy Land, but come on, this is medieval Europe, of course nothing happened. But then Selim dies, and it's Suleiman time, baby!
Yes.
So, let me...
The Magnificent, right, is his nickname, and he is the one... we did cover the battle where Suleiman basically destroys Hungary as we know it, and Hungary, and its defeat under Suleiman's hands, kind of, it ends up splitting, and that's why a part of it was under Ottoman rule, and the other part was a part of the Habsburg Empire. So his actions led to its dissolvement, the Kingdom of Hungary, which once was basically the biggest rival of the Ottomans, at least on mainland Europe, you know? So, yeah.
Take a minute to explain my excitedness at this, because this is honestly pretty exciting. Suleiman the Magnificent, aka the Lawgiver, reigned from 1520 to 1566, and he is the coolest sultan. Call me basic all you want, but I know what I'm about. In addition to codifying secular and religious law to make the justice system fairer and more efficient, he went on 13 campaigns in pretty much every direction. Europe was convinced that Suleiman was using cheat codes because the game looked like it was way too easy for him to win. He also sorted out some trade deals with the Portuguese, which before then had been rather messier and involved a lot more cannons. So he fixed the laws, expanded the empire, solidified a gigantic source of revenue from Indian Ocean trade, and things were looking pretty dang good. For most first, the reign of Suleiman was without a doubt the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, and it's because of this ridiculous trade money that he was able to go all out on building projects and art. In addition to the strong colors and bold designs of silks, manuscript paintings, and unreasonably gorgeous calligraphy, Suleiman commissioned hundreds of mosques and other buildings across the empire. The most famous examples are from the architect Mimar Sinan, whose work set the tone for centuries of Ottoman architecture. That man really knew his geometry, but let's get back to the matter at hand. It's after Suleiman's death that the general perception of the Ottomans starts to shift towards that sick man idea. And I hope I can explain in the rest of this video why the truth is more nuanced than that. The big obvious moment that people point to of, oh hey look, now they're really in decline, is the Battle of Lepanto, where the combined forces of Venice, Spain, Genoa, and the Pope banded together in literally the only instance of substantive European cooperation in the entire Renaissance. But they succeeded in stopping the Ottomans from pushing any further westward. The battle was a loss for the Ottoman navy, but since the European alliance promptly fell apart the second the battle ended, there was no follow-up, and the Ottomans happily kept everything that they had already. Honestly, not a terrible outcome. Although this famous battle signifies a broad end to Ottoman conquest, I think it's short-sighted to say that it signaled the empire's decline. After Lepanto, they still had their...
You know, it's amazing how the Ottomans... I haven't seen this with any other empire, but their early rulers from Osman and onward even to Suleiman, they had a great run of just competent emperors who each contributed to the growth and betterment of the empire. Like, they had like a good streak of just good emperors. Like sometimes like with like, I mean, sultans, I'm sorry, I keep using emperors. Sultan is the more appropriate term, but kind of like, I'm sorry, there's like a, gosh, there's some like little bugs, but so yeah, like I have yet to see like a kingdom or an empire that had a great run of just competent and good, like good to great leaders like the Ottomans did. They had like 10 in a row or like a dozen in a row, I swear. And they just had one of the best runs I've ever seen. I don't even think Rome ever had like that great of a run. Most people would say the 5 good emperors, but I think the Ottomans surpassed that with way more than 5 in a row. Again, just like they were really like, they were really good, man. It's kind of amazing.
Trade networks, they still had their government, they were still producing beautiful art, and they happily held on to lots of their territory without any threat of civil war. They had some rebellions, some client kingdoms came and went here and there was some business with Vienna that didn't go anywhere, but aside from a few fuzzy frontiers, the Mediterranean core of the empire was very stable for another 2.5 centuries after the Golden Age. Modern scholars have started filing this period under stagnation, but I feel like even that has a negative connotation. I personally prefer to describe the Ottoman Empire as chilling in the 15th, 16th, and 1700s, and I honestly don't think there's anything wrong with that. I kind of feel like I'm on a body image campaign, like stop stigmatizing empires, they come in all shapes and sizes, but they do! And this is a really good example of that! Anyway, I'll share a couple fun stories from this period, and then I'll hop forward to wrap this all up. So in the early 1600s, Sultan Ahmed raided the state treasury to build a new imperial mosque, nicknamed the Blue Mosque for the abundance of rare Persian aquamarine stone decorating the interior. Legend goes that after the mosque was built, some French traders were very impressed, and when they went home, they told all of their friends about the beautiful turquoise, i.e. Turkish, stone. So
it is very beautiful, though. I'm staring at these photos. It is impressive. Like, so beautiful. Wow. Sorry, I'm just admiring it.
with time, the word turquoise, or turquoise, simply referred to that bright blue color found inside Ahmet's mosque. And I generally think it's a gorgeous building. When I saw it in person, it absolutely blew me away. And on the other side of that, you have Sultan Murat IV, who banned alcohol and coffee, and then would go bar hopping at night in disguise in search of lawbreakers. If he found one, he would surprisingly reveal his true identity and then gleefully behead them. So you win some, you lose some.
Wow.
Also, some pirates of his forces captured Iceland for a hot minute, which is like 17 different layers of confusing. But again, I'm jumping ahead because the 1700s are mostly just Russia and Austria flexing their muscles and pushing down on the northern Ottoman border, and Persia still poking around the eastern front every once in a while, but internally things were still doing well overall. The problem was that a general apathy towards reform kept the Ottomans half a century behind the rest of Europe in terms of technology, scholarship, and military training. So it's the 1800s where their problems come to a head all at once and stuff actually starts going tangibly downhill for the Ottomans. You remember how earlier I was saying that it would have been really easy to stand up to the Ottomans if Europe properly teamed up? Yeah, so this is exactly when that happens, and unsurprisingly, it worked really well. The big threats this time around came from the West, as the Napoleonic Wars were spilling out all across Europe. France rolled through Egypt.
Yeah, that's a big thing. We did cover this from epic history and Napoleon's adventures in Egypt. Though an overall failure, the fact that he was still able to take Egypt is a pretty big indicator, right? And when the Ottomans actually send official armies to go relieve, Napoleon managed to actually, like, take out those armies. And again, it is Napoleon after all. You do expect, you know, what greatness from one of the greatest commanders of all time, but still, you know, and then again, the Egypt was an interesting thing, is that it's called Malmuk Egypt, and it was semi-autonomous, though a part of the Ottoman Empire on paper. It operated way more independently, and later on in history, as we learned with like the Suez Crisis and stuff, and later, even before that, Egypt eventually kind of started becoming more powerful than the Ottoman Empire they were a part of, and even at points threatened Anatolia, until the rest of Europe, like France and Britain, had to negotiate peace between the Ottomans and their vassal, Egypt. So it sounds a bit confusing the way I'm explaining it, but yeah, it's interesting that Egypt just kind of became too powerful.
And Britain followed shortly behind, with the result being that Egypt became semi-independent, turning into a vassal state rather than a fully fledged Ottoman territory. After that, France, Russia, and England helped Greek revolutionaries gain independence, and then France yoinked Algeria in the confusion. Then, in 1878, another war with Russia saw 50% of the Balkans go poof, England officially swiped Egypt for themselves in 1882, and Italy colonized Libya in 1912.
Basically, what worked early on with the Ottomans kind of capitalizing on European squabbling and, you know, everyone and fighting each other, basically took a dramatic shift as all of Europe seemingly said, let's jump the Ottomans, and just started taking stuff. Yeah, that's kind of funny how the turntables, eh?
The same year that Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece swept up the rest of the Balkans. At this point, it's really just a big European game of, hey, let's partition the Ottomans, woo! And as you can see, it's really after 1870 that the proverbial sick man started dramatically coughing into that handkerchief. On the one hand, it wasn't all terrible, as there were a handful of economic, military, legal, social, and technological reforms that helped modernize the empire through the 1800s. As a side note, this period saw the refinement of a centuries-old technique of water painting called ebru. In what's really reverse watercolor, artists transfer dyes into a pool using special tools to create shapes out of spots, and ultimately transfer the image onto a piece of paper. The effect it produces gives it the nickname paper marbling, and it is gorgeous. The best part is, ebru is still widely practiced today. But returning to my earlier point—
that is beautiful. I'm digging the artistic stuff between the blue, you know, stone and that. Like, I'm kind of digging the artisticness that the Ottomans offered to the world.
Pretty pictures usually can't save an empire, and the fact that them sort of keeping pace is news proves the point a little bit, so let's wrap this up. After the Ottomans allied with Germany and the Central Powers in the First World War and promptly lost, the post-war Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France carved up the Levantine and Arabian territories, confining the Ottomans to Anatolia under strict supervision of the Allies. The Turks proceeded to fight back against the Allied powers in the Turkish War of Independence, which ended with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and the Republican People's Party officially canning the Ottoman Empire and founding the modern Republic of Turkey. I'm having fun with the Turkish word sumi. And that's the Ottoman Empire. It had a really long run, and I would say a pretty solid one at that. While it's a fascinating story in general, it's useful because it addresses how we see decline. The Ottomans had a rise, a peak which turned into a long plateau, and then a sharp fall at the very end. It's crucial to our understanding of history that we recognize the possibility of unconventional historical trajectories, like for instance how there can be a middle ground between golden age and horrible collapse. The Ottomans are a great example of how an empire with good geography and solid economics can spend over 2 centuries doing the impossible, sitting back and chilling out. Thank you all so much for watching, and as the
A great video. And yeah, that's it, guys. This is a really good year, and I really enjoyed it. And, well, we have another one ahead of us, because I don't plan on ending anytime soon. So, I guess tomorrow we'll be beginning something new. Till then, bye everyone.